Chicago, April 2023. A 5-year-old girl who has never had a real home walks into a 3 stories of echoing Victorian silence and, within weeks, begins having quiet conversations with someone only she can see. In the span of 2 short months, she will deliver 5 warnings that save 5 lives. Warnings no child should ever have to carry. And every time someone asks how she knew, little Lily Grace simply looks toward the attic and whispers, "The beautiful lady told me." This is the true story of how an empty house in Logan Square learned to laugh again, and how the Mother of God chose the smallest, most broken heart to speak through. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Diane Harper was 58 and had grown accustomed to the particular hush that falls over a home when it is no longer needed by anyone but memory. The tall painted lady on Kedzie Avenue still wore its original gingerbread trim like faded jewelry. But inside the rooms had grown careful and quiet, where once children thundered down the staircase in sock-footed races. Now only the grandfather clock marked time with its slow, dignified heartbeat. Diane brewed coffee for one, set only a single cup on the table, and listened to the silence settle the way dust settles on untouched furniture. Thomas had been gone 5 years. He collapsed one October afternoon in the backyard, mid-verse of "Fly Me to the Moon," rake still in hand, leaves drifting down around him like a gentle final applause. The children, 3 of them, now scattered to the coasts and the mountains, had come home for the funeral, filled the house with their grown-up grief, then left again, taking the noise with them. Diane stayed. She retired from the Logan Square Library, tended the garden that Thomas had loved, and discovered that loneliness has a weight heavier than any book she had ever shelved. That was why, 2 winters after the funeral, she began driving to St. Hedwig's Foster Care Center every Tuesday and Thursday with armloads of picture books. The activity room smelled of crayons and peanut butter, and for 2 blessed hours the emptiness stayed outside in the snow. Children tumbled over her lap, fought for the spot closest to her elbow, begged for one more page. She read until her voice gave out, then read some more. It was the 3rd Tuesday in September when she noticed the child who never joined the circle, that a small girl in a washed too many times purple dress sat against the far wall, knees hugged to her chest, green eyes watching everything with the stillness of deep water. While the others shouted and wriggled, she remained perfectly motionless, as though movement might shatter whatever fragile truce she had made with the world. Diane felt the air change, the way it changes when you step into a church and realize you are not alone. The end of story time, she asked Sister and the quiet one in the corner. "Who is she?" "That's Lily Grace," the nun replied, lowering her voice. "Lost both parents in a car wreck on the Dan Ryan when she was 3.6 different beds since then, 6 different goodnight kisses that never came again. She speaks when she must, cries almost never. Mostly, she just waits." Diane's heart performed a slow, painful somersault. The following Thursday, she brought The Secret Garden, the very copy her own daughter had carried until its spine cracked. She read it to the whole group, but angled herself so the illustrations faced the corner. Lily never moved, yet her gaze never left the pages either. When Diane closed the book, the room fell strangely hushed, and then the smallest voice rose, barely louder than breath. "Thank you." 2 words. They were enough to break something open inside Diane that had been carefully sealed since the day they lowered Thomas into the cold October ground. After that, she came on days that were not Tuesday or Thursday. She brought new books, then colored pencils, then simply herself. She sat on the floor beside Lily and offered silence the way some people offer tea, warm, unhurried, present. Sometimes the child allowed her head to rest against Diane's arm for the length of a heartbeat. Sometimes Her fingers brushed Diane's sleeve as if checking whether the older woman was real. It was enough. 8 months later, Diane sat across from the social worker and heard her own voice say the sentence she had not known she carried inside her. I want to adopt her. The woman looked up from the paperwork, startled. Diane, Lily has profound attachment wounds. This will not be easy. Diane thought of the Victorian house waiting with all its empty rooms, thought of the attic no one had climbed since Thomas died, thought of the way Lily's tiny hand sometimes searched for one that would not let go. I have time, she said quietly. And the house is roomed. We were both waiting for the same thing. 4 months of interviews, home studies, background checks, and sleepless nights of wonder followed. But on a morning in April when the magnolias were just beginning to unfurl, Diane pulled up to St. Hedwig's with her heart beating so loudly she was sure the nuns could hear it through the walls. Lily waited on the front step, clutching a small backpack that held everything the world had left her. 3 outfits, a blanket worn soft as a prayer, and the copy of The Secret Garden with its cracked spine. When Diane opened the car door, the child looked up, green eyes wide with something between terror and hope, and asked in the smallest voice imaginable, "Is it really forever this time?" Diane knelt on the concrete, heedless of her good skirt, and gathered the little girl into arms that had been empty far too long. "Forever," she whispered against soft curls that smelled of orphanage soap. "And one day longer, if you'll let me." The big front door of the Victorian closed behind them with the soft, decisive click of a story turning its page. Lily Grace stood in the entrance hall as though she had stepped onto the moon. Small sneakers rooted to the worn Persian runner, green eyes traveling up the staircase that curved like a question mark into shadow. Sunlight fell through the stained glass transom in colored pieces across her face, red, gold, and the pale blue of Mary's mantle. And for one breathless instant Diane saw the child haloed. Diane sank to her knees on her own rug. "This is your home now, sweetheart. Every room, every corner, every creak in the night, they all belong to you." Lily's fingers tightened on the frayed strap of her backpack. She touched the carved newel post with the same reverence she might have shown the altar at church, as if expecting the wood to vanish beneath her hand. Diane watched the wonder and the fear fight across the small face and felt her own heart split cleanly in two as she gave the tour slowly. Kitchen with its ancient August stove that Thomas had sworn cooked better when you sang to it. Living room where the piano still held sheet music open to an old waltz he loved. The backyard with its overgrown lilacs and the old swing whose chains had rusted into music of their own. Lily said almost nothing, only nodded when spoken to, but her eyes drank everything in like someone storing up provisions against famine. Upstairs, Diane opened the door to the bedroom she had prepared in secret. Walls painted the softest robin's egg blue, a white iron bed draped in a quilt pieced from Thomas's old shirts, because Diane had needed to keep some part of him close. Bookshelves already sagging with treasures. The Secret Garden beside Charlotte's Web beside every volume of Narnia. A stuffed bear waited on the pillow, wearing one of Thomas's old ties like a scarf. Lily stood in the doorway a long time. Then she walked forward, placed her backpack on the floor with ceremonial care, and whispered, "It's too pretty to be mine." Diane had to turn away for a moment so the child would not see her cry. That first night Diane tucked Lily in, read 3 chapters of The Secret Garden aloud, and waited for the small body to relax into sleep. But long after the house settled into darkness, Diane heard the soft pad of bare feet on the hallway runner. She followed the sound up the narrow back stairs that only the family ever used, stairs that led to the attic no one had entered since Thomas's things were boxed away. Moonlight spilled through the round window at the gable end, silvering decades of dust. Old trunks, a dressmaker's dummy wearing Diane's wedding veil like a ghost, stacks of yellowed Christmas ornaments. In the center of the chaos stood a wooden statue Diane had forgotten existed. Our Lady of Guadalupe, perhaps 2 feet tall, brought back from a long-ago trip to Mexico City by Thomas's mother. Time had softened the paint. The stars on her mantle were nearly invisible, but the gentle tilt of her head remained exactly as Diane remembered from childhood visits to her mother-in-law's bedroom. Lily knelt in front of the statue as naturally as if she had been doing it all her life. She had dragged the faded blanket from her bed and spread it like an altar cloth. Her lips moved soundlessly. Diane stood frozen on the top step, afraid to breathe. After a long while, Lily looked up and saw her. Instead of guilt or fear, the child's face held only welcome. "She's been waiting," Lily said simply. Diane's throat closed. "Who, darling?" "The beautiful lady. She says this is a safe house now." Diane slept hardly at all that night. She lay listening to the old timbers breathe and wondered what kind of grace had walked through her front door, wearing size-small sneakers and carrying a broken heart. The conversations began in earnest the following week. Diane would find Lily missing from the breakfast table only to discover her curled at the attic window seat, cheek pressed to the cool pane, speaking in the softest murmur. Sometimes she laughed, a sound like bells heard across water. Sometimes her small shoulders shook with sobs too large for her body. Always, when Diane climbed the stairs, Lily would turn with luminous eyes and say, "She says you used to sing to your babies when they were sad. Will you sing to me?" Diane sang every lullaby she could remember, Edelweiss, Suagon, the Spanish one Thomas's mother had hummed while rocking their firstborn. Her voice cracked with rust and tears, but Lily leaned into every note as though it were bread. One evening in early May, Diane paused on the landing and heard Lily's clear small voice float down. "But why does Grandma cry at night? She thinks I don't hear, but I do." There was a long silence, the kind of silence that has weight. Then Lily again, softer. "Okay, I'll tell her you love her too." Diane had to sit down on the stairs, hand pressed to her mouth to keep the sob inside. When she finally climbed the last steps, Lily was tracing the carved roses at the statue's feet with one finger. She looked up, eyes shining. "She says your heart is not empty anymore. It's just been waiting for the right person to come fill it." Diane folded to the dusty floorboards, pulled the child into her arms, and cried the way widows cry when they suddenly discover they are no longer widows. Lily patted her back with solemn certainty, the way someone much older might comfort a child. Outside, the lilacs were beginning to open, and their sweetness drifted through the open attic window like incense. The first came on a morning when the May sky hung low and gray over Logan Square, the kind of sky that makes mothers worry about children waiting for school buses. Diane was buttering toast when Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, face pale, eyes enormous. "The beautiful lady says the blue van will not stop today. We must tell the driver." Diane's knife paused midair. "Which blue van, sweetheart?" "The one that brings the children to school." She showed me. "It will not stop, and the little boy with the red coat will." Lily's voice cracked. She could not yet learn the words for tragedy. Diane felt ice slide down her spine, but she knelt anyway. "Tell me exactly, love." Lily described the corner of Diversey and Kedzie, the precise place where the crossing guard usually stood, the red coat, the driver looking at his phone. Diane's hands shook as she called the school, then the transportation office, then the police non-emergency line. They humored the worried grandmother until the dispatcher finally agreed to send a patrol car, just in case. 27 minutes later, the blue van's brakes failed completely at that exact intersection. The officer who leapt from his cruiser and threw himself in front of the children. The van stopped inches from his body. The little boy in the red coat was pulled back by his collar just in time. When the shaken driver was asked why he hadn't braked sooner, he could only repeat, "They just went out. They just went out." The second warning arrived 2 weeks later. Lily came downstairs at breakfast clutching her chest. "Miss Karen next door has an angry heart. The lady says it beats wrong and will stop if no one helps." Karen O'Malley was 71, cheerful, and famous for her lemon bars. She waved at Lily every morning from her porch. Diane hesitated only a moment before walking across the narrow strip of lawn between the houses. Karen laughed at first. "I'm fit as a fiddle, dear." But Diane's face must have carried something convincing. By evening, Karen was in the ER with atrial fibrillation, so severe the cardiologist later said another hour would have been too late. The third warning was quieter. Lily simply refused to let Mrs. Kowalski, the elderly Polish widow on the corner, climb the ladder to clean her own gutters. She stood at the foot of the walk crying. "The lady says the wood is tired and will break." Mrs. Kowalski scolded in rapid Polish, but the tears of the child she had never met undid her. She called her nephew instead. The third rung snapped under his weight an hour later. He fell only 4 feet and walked away laughing. The rung that would have been under Mrs. Kowalski's slight frame was the one that splintered into kindling. The fourth came on a Saturday when the air smelled of cut grass and barbecue. Lily ran into the kitchen white-faced, hands over her ears as though hearing screams no one else could. "Max is going to eat poison. The bad man put it in meat behind the Garcia fence. The lady is crying." Max was the Garcia's golden retriever who greeted Lily through the chain link every afternoon. Diane phoned Elena Garcia in a panic. They found the raw hamburger laced with rat poison wedged just out of sight. The veterinarian said another 10 minutes and the dog would have been gone. "By now," the neighborhood whispered. Old women crossed themselves when Lily passed. Young mothers touched her curls for luck. Diane shielded her as best she could, but the warnings kept coming, each one more precise, more impossible. The fifth arrived on the hottest Saturday in June. The Morrisons 2 doors down were throwing a pool party for their 3-year-old's birthday. Lily had been invited for the first time, pink invitation with balloons, her name written in careful teacher handwriting. She stood at the front window watching the children arrive, then suddenly turned to Diane with terror in her eyes. "The water is not safe. The lady says the lights inside the pool are sick and will bite." Diane felt the familiar chill. She walked to the Morrison house under the pretext of bringing lemonade and asked, voice trembling, whether they had checked the pool wiring lately. Robert Morrison laughed kindly. "Brand new installation, Diane. Relax." But Lily's small hand clutched Diane's skirt so tightly that in the end Robert called the electrician to ease the kid's mind. The man arrived grumpy, found a lethal short in the underwater light fixture that would have electrocuted the first child to touch the metal ladder. He fixed it shaking his head, repeating, "I don't know how you knew, but you just saved a dozen lives." That night, the entire block seemed to hold its breathlessly wait for a sixth warning that never came. Diane found Lily in the attic again, kneeling before the statue. But this time the child's shoulders were hunched with something heavier than prayer. When Diane sat beside her, Lily whispered, "She says I don't have to be afraid anymore. She says the work is finished." Diane's arms went around the small body instinctively. "What work, my love?" "Helping the ones who needed it most. Now I get to be ordinary." The words sounded like both gift and loss in the child's mouth. Diane held her while the summer dusk pressed against the round window, and the first fireflies blinked on in the yard below. She did not ask how a 5-year-old could know about brake failure, arrhythmia, poisoned meat, or electrical faults. She only knew that something holy had passed through their house wearing the shape of an orphan girl, and that the air still trembled with it. Outside, the lilacs had finished blooming, but the roses Diane had planted along the fence, white and red, bought on impulse the week Lily arrived, were opening in sudden, reckless profusion, as if the very ground had decided to speak in perfume what words could not contain. The night after the pool was saved, the house felt different, as if someone had opened every window and let the stars lean in. Diane found Lily in the attic once more, but this time the child was not kneeling. She sat cross-legged on the old blanket, palms open on her lap, staring at the statue with a sorrow too old for her face. Moonlight painted silver bars across the floorboards and turned the dust motes into slow-moving galaxies. Diane's heart stumbled. She had come to recognize that particular silence. It was the hush that falls when something is ending. She lowered herself beside Lily without a word. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of cicadas and the soft tick of the house cooling after the day's heat. Finally, Lily whispered, "She says tonight is the last time." Diane felt the words like a hand closing gently around her throat. "The last time for what, darling?" "For talking. She says I helped everyone who needed helping. Now I get to be a little girl who only has to worry about scraped knees and bedtime stories." There was gratitude in the small voice, but also a tremor of loss. Diane understood. Lily had been given an enormous task and had carried it without complaint, and now the weight was being lifted, leaving her lighter and, for the first time, afraid of falling. Diane drew the child into her lap the way she once drew her own babies after nightmares. Lily's body was furnace hot from the summer day and trembling. "She told me other things too," Lily continued, voice muffled against Diane's shoulder. "She says you were lonely for so long that you forgot you were allowed to be happy. She says thank you for giving me a home when your own heart still had empty rooms." Diane's tears came without permission, sliding warm into Lily's curls. "And she says Thomas is proud of you. He watches us from the garden windows and smiles when we laugh." Diane could not speak. She simply rocked the child and felt the years of careful grief crack open like seed pods, spilling everything green and living inside. Lily pulled back just far enough to look up. Her green eyes were bright with tears, but steady. "I'm allowed to keep loving her, right? Just quieter." Diane managed a nod. "Always, my love. Love is never taken away. It only changes shape." They stayed until the moon moved west and the attic grew cold. Then Lily stood, took Diane's hand with perfect trust, and together they carried the little statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe down the narrow stairs. Diane's arms shook, not from the weight of carved wood, but from the weight of what was ending. They paused on the second-floor landing where the stained glass window scattered colored light across Mary's faded mantle. Lily reached up and touched the painted stars that had almost disappeared. "She likes the roses better anyway," the child said with sudden, practical certainty. "She says roses remember everything." The next morning, Diane dug a circle beneath the oldest maple in the backyard, the one Thomas had hung Lily's swing from the day after she arrived. She mixed concrete with her own hands, set a simple stone pedestal, and placed the statue in the center as gently as if laying a newborn in a crib. Lily helped plant the white and red roses they had bought weeks earlier, but never found time to put in the ground. The child's small fingers patted the soil with solemn concentration, whispering secrets to each root. When the last rose was planted, they stood back. The statue looked different in daylight, smaller, humbler, yet infinitely more present. Sunlight caught on a fleck of remaining gold in the mantle and flashed once, like a wink. Lily slipped her hand into Diane's. "She's smiling," the child announced. Diane looked again, and, though the carved lips had not changed, she saw it too. That night, Lily slept the whole night through for the first time since coming home. No midnight journeys to the attic, no murmured conversations with invisible visitors. Diane checked on her twice, half expecting to find the bed empty, but Lily lay curled around the stuffed bear, thumb in mouth, dreaming ordinary dreams. In the weeks that followed, the change was breathtaking in its quietness. Lily began to speak in full sentences at the breakfast table. She asked for seconds of pancakes and argued about wearing mismatched socks. She scraped her knee falling off the swing and howled loud enough to bring neighbors running. She made friends with the Garcia children and came home with grass stains and stories that had nothing to do with warnings or danger. She was, at last, sometimes, passing the rose-circled statue on her way to the swing, she would pause and wave. "Hi, beautiful lady," she would call, cheerful and casual, the way other children greet squirrels. And she would skip on, barefoot in summer grass, ordinary and perfect. Diane watched from the kitchen window and felt her own childhood returning in slow, astonished pieces. One evening in late August, Diane found an old rosary in Thomas's top drawer, the one his mother had carried from Mexico, olive wood beads worn smooth by decades of worried fingers. She carried it to the garden, knelt with Lily among the roses. The child took the crucifix without hesitation, kissed it the way she must have seen someone do long ago, and then handed it back. "You keep it, Grandma. She says I don't need it to talk to her anymore. I just need to be happy." Diane pressed the beads to her lips and tasted salt and roses and every answered prayer. She had stopped daring to pray. Above them, the maple leaves began to turn early, gold at the edges, as if the tree itself had decided to celebrate. Years slipped by like rosary beads through gentle fingers. The Victorian on Kedzie Avenue, once a museum of careful silence, now rang with the ordinary riot of living. Screen doors slamming, children shouting from the sidewalk, the piano downstairs coaxed back to life by small hands that had never known fear. Lily Grace grew tall and loud and gloriously ordinary. She lost her first tooth in an apple from the neighbor's tree, learned to ride a bicycle with training wheels that scraped sparks on the pavement, came home with report cards full of gold stars and pockets full of dandelions for the statue under the maple. The attic stayed empty. The round window gathered dust again. The dressmaker's dummy kept its veil of cobwebs, and the only footsteps on the narrow stairs were Diane's when she went up once a year on the anniversary of Lily's homecoming to open the window and let the April wind carry lilac through the house. She never moved anything. Some rooms, she decided, are best left as chapels to what has passed. In the garden, the roses refused to behave like ordinary flowers. They bloomed in December snow and again in July heat, white and red petals opening with reckless generosity until the whole backyard smelled like perpetual Easter. Neighbors began to stop by without excuse, to borrow sugar, to return a plate, to ask if the roses needed pruning. They always lingered longer than necessary, drawn to the quiet circle beneath the maple where the little Guadalupe stood surrounded by living perfume. Some left notes folded small and tucked between thorns, for a sick mother, for a wayward son, for courage in the face of chemotherapy. Some simply sat on the bench Diane had placed there and cried without knowing why. Diane never asked questions. She only offered iced tea in summer and hot chocolate in winter, and the roses did the rest. Lily, now 10 and all knees and elbows, still waved at the statue every morning on her way to school. "Morning, beautiful lady," she would shout, backpack bouncing, voice bright as church bells. Sometimes she added, "Thanks for letting me be normal," and then raced off to meet friends who had no idea their classmate had once carried heaven's messages in her small hands. Diane watched from the porch swing and felt Thomas beside her the way you feel sunlight even when clouds pass. She knew he was there in the way the wind moved through the maple leaves, in the way the roses opened a day early every year on his birthday, in the way Lily's laugh sometimes carried the exact cadence of his own. One December evening, snow falling thick and silent. Lily came in from building a snowman with the Garcia boys, cheeks red, eyelashes starred with flakes. She stood in the kitchen doorway, suddenly serious. "Grandma," she said, using the name that had settled on her like grace itself. "Do you think she's lonely out there in the cold?" Diane looked past her to the garden, where the statue stood serene under a lace cap of snow, roses somehow still blooming at her feet. "No, darling," she answered. "I think she's exactly where she wants to be." That night, they carried candles into the garden, two mismatched ones from the kitchen drawer, and sang Silent Night off-key while the snow kept falling. Lily's voice had begun to change, cracking between child and something older, but the joy in it was undiminished. When the last note drifted away into the dark, Lily laid her mitten-covered hand on the statue's foot and said, clear and simple, "Thank you for choosing our house." Diane felt the years fold themselves into that moment. The empty mornings before Lily, the attic conversations, the 5 impossible warnings, the night the beautiful lady said goodbye. All of it gathered like petals at the foot of the little Guadalupe who had waited decades in dust for a child who needed a mother and a mother who needed a child. Later, tucking Lily into the bed that had once seemed too pretty to be hers, Diane asked the question she had carried for 7 years. Do you ever miss her voice? Lily thought, nose wrinkling in concentration. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I smell the roses even in winter, or I hear you singing in the kitchen, or I remember that I'm allowed to be happy, and I think, maybe she never really left. Maybe she just got quieter so I could get louder. Diane kissed the forehead that no longer carried the weight of the world. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft as forgiveness, covering the city in the same hush that had once broken her heart and now filled it to overflowing. Write attic in the comments if this story has reminded you that sometimes heaven speaks in the smallest voices, in the highest rooms, for the shortest season, and then trusts us to carry the message in ordinary, laughing, imperfect lives. May the same Virgin who filled an empty attic with warnings and an empty house with love fill every silent corner of your heart until it, too, overflows.